Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today we are diving into the book, The 7 Rules of Trust, Why It Is Today's Most Essential Superpower. Okay, let's dive into this explainer by tackling a massive paradox we see all the time in the modern workplace. I'm talking about paranoid corporate micromanagement. You know the drill, right? So many organizations today rely on these zero-trust policies, tracking keystrokes, monitoring cameras, basically assuming that if you aren't constantly surveilling your team, they're just going to slack off. But what if that exact instinct is actually destroying your team's collective intelligence? What if trust isn't just some fluffy HR buzzword, but literally the ultimate hard-nosed competitive advantage for any leader trying to build a seriously high-performing team? To really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the number 21. That is the remarkably, honestly kind of dismal number of articles produced in an entire year by a project called Nupedia. Now, Nupedia was Wikipedia co-founder Jimmy Wales's very first attempt at building an online encyclopedia. And it was built entirely on a zero-trust, expert gate-kept model, meaning everything had to be rigorously peer-reviewed by verified experts before it ever saw the light of day. Because the system totally refused to extend trust to the wider community, it became this massive bottleneck, and the project just barely got off the ground. And this brilliantly illustrates the core thesis of Wales's book. See, Nupedia failed because it assumed the worst. It operated from a place of deep suspicion. Wikipedia, on the other hand, it launched as this messy side experiment based on radical trust. It literally allowed random strangers to collaborate online by default. At the time, critics called it a crazy idea that would absolutely collapse into total chaos. But instead, it became one of the most trusted, globally resilient authorities on the internet. Why? Because zero-trust leadership stifles collective intelligence, while radical trust, well, it scales it exponentially. Which brings us to part 1, the 3 pillars of trust, shifting from a soft skill to a hard framework. So trust isn't just some vague, fuzzy feeling you magically have or don't have. Wales argues that trust is a living thing. Think of it like a garden. As a manager or a leader, you can't just plant some seeds and walk away, right? You've got to actively tend to it, engineer it, protect it. If you really want high-performing teams, you need to grasp the structural mechanics behind how trust actually grows. The book leans heavily on Francis Fry's framework here, the triangle of trust. It shows you can systematically design trust by balancing 3 actionable pillars. First up is authenticity. This is all about character, basically being exactly who you say you are. Second is empathy, which means genuinely caring about your team and their success. And third is logic, meaning competency and reliability. Like, do you actually deliver what you promise? When leaders operate with these 3 pillars intact, they stop relying on all that exhausting micromanagement and start building an environment where people feel secure enough to actually take initiative. But here's the catch. Without deliberate design, environments can turn toxic so fast. Just look at this quote from the book. Social media platforms are where trust goes to die. Wales really doesn't mince words here. On platforms driven by engagement algorithms, polarization just thrives because the environment was never designed for collaboration, it was designed for attention. If you apply that same logic to a corporate team, a poorly designed culture, one that rewards performative outrage or sneaky office politics over genuine cooperation, is going to quickly become a trust graveyard. So the big question is, how do we build functional, collaborative spaces instead? Let's get into part 2, 7 rules for team leaders. Building the foundation of high-performing teams. This is where we break down Wales's 7 rules, translating Wikipedia's totally improbable rise into a highly actionable management guide. Whether you're leading a scrappy startup or managing a massive enterprise department, these principles are basically your blueprint for getting people to perform at their absolute best. Let's move in to see how this builds our foundation with the first 3 rules. Rule number 1, make it personal. Look, trust doesn't happen between corporate logos or fancy job titles. It happens person to person. You simply can't replace genuine human connection with a corporate policy. Rule 2, be positive about people. Humans are actually wired to collaborate, so lean into that and assume good faith. And rule 3, create a clear purpose. You need a shared North Star. Think about Wikipedia's mission, simply a free encyclopedia for every single person on the planet. That sheer, crystal clear clarity kept their volunteers perfectly aligned. By applying these first 3 rules, you're actively replacing the paranoia and the tracking software with real human connection and a deeply unifying mission. But this brings us right to rule 4, be trusting. And honestly, this highlights the ultimate manager's dilemma, doesn't it? How on earth do you trust first without getting burned? In our modern surveillance-heavy work cultures, giving away trust feels like a massive, terrifying risk. If you drop the monitoring tools and stop hovering over your employees, won't people just take advantage of you? Wales answers this by advocating for what he calls a sunny, pro-social view of human nature. And this introduces a really fascinating concept we can call the give-to-get paradox. See, you absolutely cannot demand trust from your team from a position of suspicion. It is fully reciprocal. To get responsible behavior, a leader actually has to take the leap and extend trust before it is officially earned. When Wikipedia chose to trust volunteers by default, instead of locking everything down like Nupedia did, they unlocked this overwhelming wave of responsible, deeply dedicated behavior. It really proves that when people feel trusted, they generally rise to the occasion. Okay, but what happens when the pressure is on? Because it always is eventually. That's exactly where Rule 5, be civil, and Rule 6, be independent, come into play. Look at how these function side by side. Being civil doesn't mean avoiding debate. In fact, Wales strongly encourages productive disagreement, but you absolutely must actively manage toxic behavior so the collaboration remains totally safe. Civility is essential to maintaining relationships under fire. Meanwhile, being independent means sticking fiercely to your core mission. Avoid getting dragged into external drama, unnecessary controversies, or hyperpartisan factions. Neutrality and relentless focus, that is what protects your organization's credibility in the long run. Moving on to part 3, rebuilding trust after a fall, and the power of radical transparency. This brings us to the final rule, be transparent. Because look, mistakes are totally inevitable. A project will fail, a deadline is going to be missed, maybe a server crashes. But Wales makes a really critical point here. Trying to hide the problem or hiding behind confusing, jargon-heavy corporate speak destroys your team's credibility infinitely faster than the actual mistake ever could. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this concept of the statement against interest. It's actually a legal term referring to testimony that harms the person giving it. So why does Wales bring this up in a business explainer? Because it is a phenomenal leadership hack. When a leader opens a statement by openly admitting fault, saying, hey, we messed up, or I totally got this wrong, it immediately disarms skepticism. It heavily signals humility and transparency. The audience, whether that's your customer base or your internal team, instinctively assumes you are telling the truth. And from that solid ground, the rebuilding of trust can actually begin. To prove this, the book offers a real wait what historical anecdote. Jimmy Wales points to Richard Nixon's 1952 Checkers speech regarding campaign funding. Long before the massive scandals of his presidency, Nixon used radical transparency by laying out his personal finances in a deeply open way to the public. And honestly, it worked. It completely diffused the crisis. Wales argues that if you draw back the curtain and reveal the truth, even when it's super uncomfortable, or maybe especially when it's uncomfortable, you maintain trust. If there's literally nothing to hide behind the scenes, your team and your public know they can absolutely rely on you. So the crucial point is this complete framework right here. Make it personal, be positive about people, create a clear purpose, be trusting, be civil, be independent, and be transparent. Listen, these aren't just empty platitudes. They are hard operational rules. They actively lower the friction of collaboration, they speed up cooperation, and they make lasting, high-performing communities totally possible. If it worked to turn the Wild West of the early internet into the most reliable encyclopedia in human history, it can absolutely work in your boardroom, on your Slack channels, and in your management meetings. Which leaves us with a critical question to reflect on today. Is your management style actively building organizational trust, or quietly destroying it with paranoia? Remember, trust is not an inanimate object. It's a living garden. It is today's most essential superpower and absolutely the ultimate competitive advantage for any leader willing to step back, stop micromanaging, and just start trusting. Think about how you can apply these rules to your own teams this week. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode.